Hey, no friends, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite albums. Yes, we don't have school today, and all the people in my class are hanging out outside in the outside world, and I'm in the inside alone reviewing albums. Anyway, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite metal albums of the decade, if not my favorite, and that is Altar of Plagues, Teethed Glory and Injury. So, Altar of Plagues is an atmospheric black metal band hailing from Cork, Ireland, and they are best known for their atmospheric black metal. Except for this album, they sort of change up their sound a little bit and made something that's more metalcore and more technical than atmospheric. And yes, this is also their final album apparently, and boy did they end off on a high note. This album is fantastic. From start to end, it is incredibly cohesive, and it is not your average black metal album where the entire thing is just a blast of noise and distortion. This thing is multifaceted. Most of the tracks on this album are only 4 to 5 minutes long, but each one of them has so many phases and stages and so many different ideas. Also, I really love the harsh, jagged guitars on this album, the really violent distortion. I really like the ragged guitar riffs. The thumping drums are often really raw and primal. The growls and howls are often pained. And also, the bass on this album is thick and fat. And also, the band incorporates more instrumentation such as synths, strings, as well as electronics. They managed to fit a lot of the electronic loops and samples onto this album to make their music even more fierce and disturbing. The album starts off with Mills, which is an intro track essentially, but it is the album starts off with the track Mills, which is an intro track essentially, but it is 4 minutes long and it's a good intro track. At first, we get some wretched, ragged strings that are very dissonant, and then after a minute or so, we get some thumping drums, and then afterwards, after the halfway point, we get some beats that sound like, to me, mic taps, like they're tapping on the mics, like this. And these mic taps, they get louder and louder and louder as it guides us into these very dramatic, loud, soaring guitar riffs that are very dramatic and very cinematic, and they build into the second track, God Alone, which is an amazing track as well. This is a track in 3/4 time signature, but it does jump a little bit in its time signatures once in a while. The guitars that goes along with the time signature at first is very dissonant and ragged and raw. It's like something very errored has happened, but then afterwards we get some really angry guitar riff that is angry in a way it's subdued. It's angry in a subdued, calculated, and angular way. And then afterwards we get some growls that are very just freakish and nightmarish. It's very tortured. And then after the halfway point we get another quiet spot that sort of gives you a breath of fresh air until it blasts you with that very angry guitar riff once again. And towards the end we even have a key change which really transitions smoothly and naturally, and at the end we get some chants that are cultish. Again, it's only 4 minutes long, but it's multifaceted. A lot of amazing song ideas just melting into one another, stitched to one another very smoothly and creatively. The second core track, the third track, is A Body Shrouded, and it starts off quiet with its clicking clock sounds and some grainy, just static noise. It really builds an uncertain, unpredictable atmosphere until the guitar riffs sort of melt in, and they're not necessarily angry or aggressive. They're actually very cold and lonesome and dreadful, but they sort of bob up and down in this poly rhythm. It's very creative, Towards the halfway point of the track, of course, it becomes this very loud, soaring black metal passage, which sort of lasts until the end of the track, and it sounds fantastic as well. We have the track Burn to Year, which takes a little bit of time, for me at least, to enjoy. It's a track that's hard to digest, but there's a lot of amazing details in the track that requires multiple listens to catch. First, we have the polyrhythm and the beat of the track, which is actually somewhat danceable, even though it's sort of a polyrhythm. At first, it's 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, very constant, but later on, another time signature is slapped on top. And we also get some really intense, fierce vocals on this track, probably the fiercest on the entire album. And of course, we also get some black metal blast beat drums, yes. And in the middle of the track, these drums sort of melt into this drony ambient wall of noise, and then afterwards it quiets down, but then at the very, very, very end, like the last few seconds of the track, it builds back up again into this very impressive and dramatic crescendo. We have the 8-minute long track, A Remedy and a Fever, the longest track on the album. And it starts off really raw and primal, almost metalcore-ish, but then afterwards we sort of get these reverbed, cultish vocals, which are very chilled, very icy, and definitely downtrodden. And of course, after this album brings us to a very low, it's gonna bring us to a very high. We are guided by some electronic loop samples into these very heavy guitar passages, and also these distorted, dissonant walls of noises, which blinks from left to right channel constantly. It's very audio stimulating. Yeah. And we have the track 12 was Ruin, which is a way more accessible track on the album because the guitar riff on this track is very catchy, I must say. It's very melodic and it's kind of groovy. It almost has this Middle Eastern flair to it, which I really love. And the bed of guitars underneath this riff is very post-apocalyptic, almost biblical. We also get some sampled loop beats, as well as some amazing, just crispy, clear, cyclic, crumbling drums towards the end of the track, and it just sounds amazing as well. We have the track Scald Scar of Water, which, I guess compared to other tracks on the album, it doesn't have much in terms of dynamics and progression, but it still sounds pretty impressive. The guitars on this track, they sort of dwell in between pained and chaotic, and of course the bed of instrumentations underneath is very noisy and atmospheric. The noise towards the end of the track is very shrill and ear-piercing. And again, I wish there's more dynamic on this track, but it still sounds kind of amazing. We have the penultimate track, Found, Oval, and Final. And it has some really nice, dramatic, jagged guitar riffs at the beginning, but that guitar riff sort of lasts for the entire duration of the track, so the instrumentation towards the halfway point on the track goes a little bit dry and a little quiet, but still it's decent. It's a decent track. And we have the ending of the album, Reflection Pulse Remains, which is an epic closer to the album. We get this constant groove in the beginning, which then of course evolves into this really complicated polyrhythm. And we also get these very epic, dramatic, cinematic, triumphant post-rock guitar riffs that just soars higher and higher and higher until the very end of the track. The arpeggios of that guitar riff just ascend us to heaven of some sorts. And we also get some constantly banging drums that are very primal and violent in the middle of the track, which is paired with some woodwinds, I think, but compressed and distorted in a way it's almost unrecognizable. It almost sounds like recorder to me, like a recorder, but like so compressed in a way it's ear-piercing. And then at the end, it's very subdued and it sort of fades out, but in a very cinematic way, in a way I actually enjoy it. So yeah, overall this album is solid. It's cohesive from beginning to end. The guitar work, the drum work, the sampling work on this album is very creative. It's very brilliant. And yes, it's a very hard album to digest. For me, it takes a few listens for me to really enjoy the album. It's not very melodic, not very catchy, and it does get a little bit like it gets nowhere sometimes, but still, that being said, it's probably my favorite metal album of the decade. Yes. May not be for everyone, but it really clicked for me. My favorite track here, and also I forgot to mention that the album title and the song titles and the other album titles and song titles from this band, they are all very well designed, like teethed glory and injury. Like this phrase, these four words, they bear so much weight. It's almost biblical, almost religious, but in a way it's not purely religious. It's almost tinged in occultisms, but in a way it's dramatic, and I love it. So yeah, my favorite track here is God Alone, and my least favorite is Found Oval and Final. I am giving Altar of Plagues, Teethed Glory and Injury a strong 8 to a light 9 out of 10. So, have you listened to this album from 1 to 10? How much did you rate it? Like, if you like it, if you hate it, subscribe if you want more. Thanks for watching. Also, I will be doing a review on Lightning Bolt very soon.